The awakening storm. The silence before thunder. The grand nexus hung in the void like a jewel of civilization, 500 kilometers of gleaming metal and crystal, home to representatives from 600 species across the known galaxy. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Coalition had maintained peace through diplomacy, trade, and mutual understanding. War was a concept studied in history archives, not practiced in reality. That changed when the Void Reapers arrived. Captain Marcus Chen stood at the observation window of his quarters, watching emergency shuttles streak through space like frightened fireflies. Another colony lost, another billion souls erased from existence, the third in 2 weeks. He pressed his hand against the cold glass, feeling the subtle vibration of the station's massive engines. Even here, at the heart of Coalition power, fear was palpable. His communicator chimed. The emergency council session was beginning. Marcus made his way through corridors filled with panicked aliens, a Thessian family huddled together, their translucent skin flickering with distress colors. A group of Corthan merchants argued loudly, their multiple arms gesturing wildly. Everyone knew the Coalition's peaceful methods had failed. 3 fleets sent to negotiate, 3 fleets vaporized without response. The council chamber was chaos when Marcus entered. 600 species trying to speak at once created a cacophony that even advanced translation systems struggled to process. At the center platform stood High Arbiter Velen, a being so ancient his crystalline body had begun to fracture with age. "Order!" Velen's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Silence fell immediately. "We face extinction. Our attempts at communication have been ignored. Our defensive fleets have been destroyed. We must now discuss options previously considered unthinkable." Ambassador Teron stood from the Avarian delegation. His feathered crest was flattened against his skull, a sign of deep distress among his kind. "High Arbiter, we all know what you are suggesting, the humans." He said the word like it tasted bitter. "We invite Deathworlders to fight our battles?" Marcus felt every eye in the chamber turned toward him. He was the only human present. Earth had joined the Coalition only 30 years ago, and humanity was still viewed with suspicion. Their home planet was classified as a Class 12 Death World, a designation reserved for the most hostile environments that could produce sentient life. "Captain Chen," Velen said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "your people have extensive experience with warfare. We do not ask this lightly, but we need your expertise." Marcus stood slowly. He had prepared for this moment, knowing it would come. "High Arbiter, members of the Coalition, I understand your hesitation. Humanity's history is violent. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day. Predators, diseases, natural disasters. We survived them all by learning to fight, to adapt, to never surrender." A Letharian delegate, her silicon-based body shimmering, spoke up. "That is precisely why we fear you. You make war an art form. You celebrate warriors. You teach your young ones to fight before they can properly reason." "Yes," Marcus admitted, "we do. Because on Earth, those who did not learn to fight did not survive to pass on their genes. But we also learned something else. We learned to fight for others, to protect the weak, to stand between innocents and those who would harm them." He pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's history, cities rising and falling, wars devastating continents, but also images of humans helping each other, rescue workers pulling people from rubble, soldiers shielding civilians, doctors treating enemies. "We know the cost of war better than any species here. We know what it takes from those who fight it, and we know that sometimes the only way to preserve peace is to be willing to destroy those who threaten it." The chamber erupted in argument again. Some delegates supported calling for human assistance. Others feared what humanity might become if given military authority. The debate raged for hours. Finally, Velen called for a vote. The resolution passed by the narrowest margin. The Coalition would formally request Human military intervention. Marcus immediately sent the encrypted message to Earth. The response came within an hour. Humanity would answer the call. Humanity's response. 6 days later, the first human warships arrived at the Grand Nexus. Marcus stood in the docking bay as the flagship Indomitable settled into its berth. The ship was massive, scarred from previous conflicts, every surface designed for function rather than aesthetics. It looked exactly like what it was, a weapon built to survive and destroy. The airlock opened, and Admiral Sarah Kovacs emerged. She was in her 50s, with gray streaking her dark hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. Behind her came a full military contingent, their armor bearing the insignia of the United Earth Defense Force. "Captain Chen," Sarah said, extending her hand, "good to see you again." "Admiral Kovacs," Marcus replied, shaking firmly, "I wish it were under better circumstances." "Combat always is." Sarah looked around the bay, noting the aliens watching nervously from a distance. "I take it they are not thrilled about our presence." "They are terrified of the Void Reapers, and almost as terrified of us." Sarah smiled grimly. "Then let's make sure only one of those fears is justified. Brief me on the enemy." They walked through the station to the command center. Marcus pulled up all available data on the Void Reapers. The images showed creatures unlike anything in Coalition records. Biomechanical horrors that seemed to be part organic, part machine. All nightmare. They consumed entire planets, harvesting resources and genetic material with ruthless efficiency. They appeared 6 months ago at the Outer Rim. No communication, no demands. They just started destroying everything. 40 systems lost. Estimated casualties, 7 billion. Sarah studied the tactical displays. Ship composition? Primarily cruiser-class vessels, heavily shielded. Their weapons use some kind of matter disruption technology. Coalition shields are useless against it. Weaknesses? None identified yet. Every engagement has been one-sided. Sarah nodded slowly. Then we will have to find some. What about ground forces? They deploy bio-warriors, fast, armored, and lethal. Coalition security forces are not equipped for this kind of combat. But we are. Sarah activated her communicator. "Colonel Rivera, report to command." Minutes later, Colonel James Rivera entered the command center. He was shorter than Sarah, but built like a tank, muscles earned from years of training in Earth's punishing gravity. His face bore scars from combat on 3 different worlds. "Colonel," Sarah said, "we need a ground assault team ready within 48 hours, full combat loadout. Assume hostile environment and overwhelming enemy numbers." James grinned. It was not a pleasant expression. "Ma'am, I will have the 1st Marines ready in 24. As James left to prepare his troops, Ambassador Terran entered the command center. He looked at the human officers with barely concealed anxiety. "Admiral Kovacs," he said carefully, "the Council wishes to know your strategy." "Simple," Sarah replied. "We find the enemy, we engage the enemy, we destroy the enemy. But the casualties will be primarily human. We know what we signed up for, Ambassador. Your people have lived in peace for millennia. That is beautiful. That is worth preserving. But peace requires guardians willing to do ugly things to protect it." Terran was silent for a moment. "Why? Why would you risk your lives for species that fear you?" Marcus answered, "Because someone has to, and because we hope that one day you will look at us and see more than just weapons. We want you to see friends." Before Terran could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. A communications officer shouted across the room, "Admiral, multiple hyperspace signatures detected in the Meridian system. Void Reaper fleet, massive presence. They are attacking the colony there." Sarah was already moving. "All ships, battle stations, plot jump coordinates for Meridian. We leave in 10 minutes. "Admiral," the officer said, voice shaking, "our scouts count 120 enemy vessels."
How many ships do we have? 12, ma'am. Sarah did not hesitate. Then we'd better make them count. Chen, Rivera, with me. It is time to show the galaxy what Deathworlders can do. As the human fleet prepared to jump, Marcus looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, billions of beings were counting on them, counting on humanity to be the monsters that protected them from worse monsters. The Indomitable shuddered as its hyperspace drives engaged. In moments, they would face an enemy that had destroyed every force sent against it. The odds were impossible. The mission was suicide. Marcus smiled. Impossible odds were where humans did their best work. The stars blurred, and they plunged toward battle.
The price of victory. The Battle of Meridian. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace directly into hell. The Meridian system was burning. 3 planetary colonies were under assault, their orbital defense platforms reduced to glowing debris. Void Reaper ships moved through the carnage like sharks through blood, their dark holes absorbing light itself. Admiral Sarah Kovacs watched her tactical display update with grim efficiency. 120 enemy vessels versus her 12 ships. The numbers were laughable. Every strategic algorithm screamed retreat, but retreat meant millions of civilian deaths. All ships, attack formation Omega, Sarah ordered calmly. Target their command carriers. Ignore the smaller vessels. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Hayes, looked up sharply. Ma'am, that puts us directly in their crossfire. We'll take massive damage. Correct, but we'll also force them to concentrate their fire on us instead of the colonies. Buy time for evacuation shuttles. Sarah's voice was steel. Execute the order. The human fleet surged forward. Void Reaper ships immediately adjusted course to intercept. Their weapons fired, beams of dark energy that unraveled molecular bonds on contact. The Coalition had never developed countermeasures because their technology operated on fundamentally different principles. But human shields were crude, brute force electromagnetic barriers that simply absorbed and dispersed energy. Not elegant, but effective. The Indomitable shuddered as enemy fire struck her forward shields. Power fluctuated throughout the ship. Shields at 70%, holding. Return fire, all weapons. Humanity had brought railguns to an energy weapon fight. Massive magnetic accelerators launched tungsten slugs at relativistic speeds. No fancy particle beams, just kinetic energy and physics. The projectiles struck a Void Reaper cruiser with the force of small nuclear weapons. Its organic armor buckled and tore. Hit confirmed, Hayes said with satisfaction. Enemy vessel venting atmosphere. Around them, the rest of the human fleet engaged in similar brutal efficiency. The destroyer Relentless rammed an enemy frigate when its weapons failed, both ships exploding in a brief new star. The cruiser Defiant lost half its crew to a hull breach, but kept fighting, its surviving guns never stopping. On the planet below, Colonel James Rivera led the first Marines into the capital city. His dropship screamed through atmosphere at speeds that would have killed any other species through sheer acceleration. Humans could survive it because their bodies had evolved under Earth's crushing gravity and violent accelerations. They hit the ground hard. James was first out, his powered armor absorbing impacts that would shatter alien bones. Around him, 200 Marines deployed with practiced precision. The city was in chaos. Void Reaper bio-warriors stalked through streets, harvesting civilians with mechanical efficiency. The creatures were nightmares made flesh, 3 meters tall, covered in black carapace, with multiple limbs ending in blade and gun configurations. They moved with insect-like coordination, guided by some kind of hive intelligence. James raised his rifle and fired. Armor-piercing rounds punched through the nearest bio-warrior's torso. It screeched and charged. He fired again and again until it finally collapsed 3 meters from him. "Spread out," James ordered. "Fire teams of 4. Clear the sectors building by building. Rules of engagement: if it's not human or coalition, kill it." The Marines moved like they had been born for this. Because they had. Every human trained from childhood in some form of combat. Sports, martial arts, strategy games. It was woven into their culture because Earth had demanded it. Now that training paid dividends. Sergeant Maya Torres led her team into a residential complex. They found 30 Avrian civilians trapped on the upper floors, surrounded by bio-warriors. The creatures were systematically breaking through barricades. "Flashbangs," Maya ordered. "On my mark. 3, 2, 1. Grenades flew through windows. The bio-warriors, with their enhanced sensory organs, were momentarily disoriented. Maya's team breached the building, their armor absorbing incoming fire as they methodically eliminated targets. "Civilians secure," she reported, moving to extraction point. Similar scenes played out across the city. Human Marines fought with a ferocity that shocked even themselves. They took casualties. Private Chen lost an arm to bio-warrior blade. Corporal Anderson died shielding a group of children. But they never stopped advancing. The turning point. Aboard the Indomitable, Dr. Elena Vasquez worked frantically in her laboratory. The ship shook constantly from weapons fire, but she barely noticed. She had samples of Void Reaper biomatter collected from destroyed enemy ships. Under her microscope, she saw something extraordinary. The organic components were not natural evolution. They were engineered, optimized for specific functions. But the engineering was imperfect. There were redundancies, inefficiencies, vulnerabilities. "They are not invincible," Elena muttered, her fingers flying over her instruments. "They are just well designed." She found it in the neural cluster that coordinated their hive functions. A specific frequency of electromagnetic radiation disrupted the connections, not permanently, but long enough to cause confusion and disorientation. She ran to the bridge, nearly falling as another impact rocked the ship. "Admiral, I found something." Sarah turned from her tactical display. Her uniform was torn, blood on her temple from a console explosion. "Make it quick, Doctor. We are losing." Their hive coordination uses biological quantum entanglement. If we generate an EM pulse at 4.7 terahertz, we can disrupt it temporarily, maybe 5 minutes of chaos. Will it work? Theoretically. Sarah smiled grimly. Good enough. Hayes, prepare all ships to generate that pulse on my mark. Coordinate with ground forces. Everyone hit simultaneously. She opened a channel to the entire human fleet and ground teams. All units, this is Kovacs. We have one shot at this. Dr. Vasquez has identified a weakness. On my signal, we generate an EM pulse that will disorient the enemy. We will have maybe 5 minutes before they adapt. In that time, we hit them with everything we have got. No holding back. No second chances. She paused, looking at the casualty report scrolling across her screen. 3 ships lost, 2,000 dead, but the colonies were still evacuating, still surviving. Humanity has always excelled at the impossible. We climbed out of Africa with stone tools. We conquered a planet that tried to kill us daily. We reached for the stars when everyone said we could not. Today, we do the impossible again. For the coalition, for the innocent, for everyone who cannot fight for themselves. All units prepare for synchronized pulse. In the city below, James received the order. He gathered his Marines, now down to 140 from the original 200. They looked exhausted, battered, but unbroken. 5 minutes, James told them. That is all we get. Make them count. Make every shot matter. Make them remember that they picked a fight with Deathworlders. The countdown began. 10 seconds. 5, 3, 2, 1. Every human ship and every suit of powered armor generated the pulse. Simultaneously. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Void Reaper ships suddenly broke formation, their movements erratic. Bio-warriors on the ground stumbled, their coordinated attacks dissolving into individual confusion. "Now!" Sarah roared. "All weapons! Fire!" The human fleet unleashed everything. Railguns, missiles, lasers, even the crude nuclear weapons that other species had abandoned centuries ago. The Void Reaper command carriers, stripped of their supporting screen, took devastating damage. On the ground, Marines advanced in a coordinated assault.
They moved through disoriented bio-warriors like a scythe through wheat. James personally led the charge into what intelligence identified as a command node. The building was organic, pulsing with alien life. "Plant the charges," he ordered. "Bring this whole structure down." His demolitions expert, Sergeant Park, worked with steady hands despite the chaos. Explosives were placed at structural weak points. They had 4 minutes left before the enemy adapted. 3 minutes. The charges were set. James ordered evacuation. His team ran as the building began to collapse, its organic support severed. 2 minutes. In space, a Void Reaper command carrier's shields finally failed. The Indomitable's main railgun fired one last time. The tungsten slug punched completely through the massive ship, secondary explosions rippling along its length. 1 minute. The pulse was fading. Enemy ships began to coordinate again. But it was too late. Their command structure was shattered. Their ground forces were in disarray. 0. The Void Reapers did what no coalition force had ever seen them do. They retreated. Ships broke off from combat, jumping to hyperspace. The surviving bio-warriors collapsed, their connection to the hive mind severed. Silence fell across the Meridian system, broken only by the crackle of fires and the hiss of venting atmosphere from damaged ships. Resolution and new understanding. The aftermath was brutal to witness. The human fleet had lost 5 ships and 4,000 personnel. The Marines had suffered 40% casualties, but the colonies had survived. 8 million civilians evacuated safely. A victory, but one purchased